The sun beat down on the parched earth, a relentless hammer against the skull. Dust, fine as flour, coated everything, rising in lazy puffs with every gust of wind that offered no relief, only heat. She lay there, the grit in her mouth tasting of despair and something metallic, like old blood. The black wool of the blanket pressed down, suffocating her. They hadn't even bothered with a full 6 feet. Just enough to quiet her, enough to make sure she couldn't claw her way out before. Before what? Before they were long gone with the haul? Before the buzzards found her. Fear was a cold serpent coiled in her belly, its scales scraping against her ribs with every shallow, desperate breath. At 14, Alara had seen too much hardship, too much meanness in the world. But this was a betrayal that went deeper than skin and bone. Her own brothers, the only family she had left. They talked about splitting the gold, about starting fresh somewhere, maybe Texas. She'd believed them, foolishly, desperately. And their solution was to bury her alive, a secret kept by the earth itself. Panic threatened to choke her. A scream lodged behind lips cracked and dry. She tried to shift, but the weight was immense, the soil packed tight. Her fingers, scraped raw, felt only the rough texture of the blanket and the unyielding pressure of the ground above. Darkness pressed in on her, absolute and terrifying. The world outside was just a memory. The blinding glare of the sun, the vast, indifferent sky, the sound of their horses riding away, leaving her to this silent, airless tomb. She squeezed her eyes shut, though it made no difference in the darkness. Tears, hot and useless, tracked paths through the dust on her cheeks. Please, she thought. A silent plea to a god she wasn't sure heard anything out here. Please. Above her, the world went on. A lizard scuttled across the disturbed earth. A hawk circled high, a distant, uncaring speck. Then a different sound. Not the wind, not the buzzing of flies. A rhythmic thud, growing steadily louder. Hoofbeats. Alara's heart leaped, a frantic bird against her ribs. Hope, sharp and dangerous, pricked at her numbness. But who would be out here? This was rough country, miles from any trail. Maybe they'd come back. The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through her, colder than the earth around her. Were they checking their work? The hoofbeats stopped, directly above her. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of a horse snorting. Then, a man's voice, low, rough-edged, unfamiliar. Well, I'll be damned. Alara held her breath, every muscle tensed. He wasn't talking to anyone. Was he talking about her? Could he see the disturbed earth? Could he know? A moment of silence stretched, agonizingly long. Then, the distinct sound of boots on gravelly soil, moving around. He was looking, her terror warred with a desperate, fragile hope. If he was a stranger, maybe he wouldn't leave her. The boots stopped again, closer now, right above where her head must be. She could feel the subtle vibration through the soil. A pause. Then the scrape of metal. A shovel? He was digging. Panic flared anew. Was this some ghoul come to rob a shallow grave? But she had nothing. Only the clothes on her back and a locket hidden beneath her dress. The sound of digging grew more insistent, the shovel biting into the hard-packed earth. Each scrape was a jolt through her body, a promise of either salvation or something worse. She wanted to cry out, to let him know she was alive, but her throat was dry, and fear had stolen her voice. He dug with a practiced rhythm, steady and strong. The earth above her lightened, the pressure beginning to ease, just a fraction. She took a deeper breath, the air inside her small pocket of dark feeling less stale. Then a different sound, the tearing of fabric. The shovel must have snagged the blanket. The digging paused. The man knelt. She could tell by the shift in weight and the rustle of fabric just above her. A grunt of effort. Then, miraculously, a sliver of light. He had pulled back a corner of the blanket. Alara blinked against the sudden, harsh glare. A face loomed above her. Silhouetted against the blinding sky, it was hard to make out details, but she saw the wide-brimmed hat, the shadow of a nose, a jaw set hard. Not her brother's. Relief, so potent it was dizzying, washed over her, followed immediately by a fresh wave of fear. Who was he? Well, I'll be double damned, the voice said again, closer this time. It held a note of surprise, maybe even shock, but no immediate threat. He reached down, his hand large and rough, covered in dust. Alara flinched back instinctively, pressing herself deeper into the earth beneath her. Easy, girl, the voice said, gentler now, but still cautious. I ain't gonna hurt you. She stared up at him, her eyes wide and pleading. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the dust. He saw her face, the dirt, the terror, the way she was buried. Recognition dawned in his eyes. This wasn't just a grave. It was a live burial. Without another word, he began to dig faster, scooping the dirt away with powerful strokes. The blanket was peeled back, revealing her dirt-caked face, her tangled hair, her thin shoulders pressed into the ground. He worked methodically, freeing her arms, her chest. The pressure eased, breath coming easier now, though still ragged. When he had cleared enough earth for her to move, he stopped, leaning on the shovel, his chest rising and falling. He was a tall man, lean and weathered, with eyes that seemed to have seen too much, like hers. They were blue, she noticed, a startlingly clear blue in the tanned, lined face. A familiar face? No, she didn't think so, but there was something. A stillness about him, a quiet authority. He offered his hand again. This time, after a moment of hesitation, she took it. His grip was firm, steady. He pulled her gently from the shallow pit, helping her stumble onto shaky legs beside it. She swayed, dizzy and disoriented, the world tilting precariously. The sun hit her like a physical blow, and she squeezed her eyes shut again, raising a dirt-caked hand to shield them. The ground felt firm beneath her feet, blessedly not pressing down on her. She gulped in the hot, dusty air, coughing. You all right? He asked, his voice still quiet. She couldn't speak, could only nod, a tiny, jerky motion. She looked back at the hole in the ground, then at him, a silent question in her eyes. Why? He seemed to understand. He didn't ask her name, didn't ask who had done this. Not yet. He just looked from the hole to her, back to the vast, empty landscape. His jaw tightened. Let's get you some water, he said finally, turning towards his horse. It was a sturdy bay, tied loosely to a scraggly mesquite bush nearby. He moved with an easy, unhurried grace, despite the urgency of the situation. He wasn't just some drifter. There was a purposefulness about him, a way he held himself. He unhooked a canteen from his saddle, uncapped it, and offered it to her. Slow now, he cautioned as she reached for it with trembling hands. The water was cool and life-giving, rinsing the grit from her mouth and throat. She drank greedily, then coughed again, managing to keep it down. She handed the canteen back, her eyes fixed on him. He took it, recapped it, his gaze searching her face. The dirt couldn't hide the bruises blooming on her cheek and jaw, the terror still etched around her eyes. He saw the thinness of her frame, the ragged state of her clothes. He saw a child who had been through something terrible. Your family? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. Alara flinched, hugging herself, her gaze dropping to the ground. She couldn't say it. The shame, the pain, too raw. He waited patiently. The silence stretched, filled only by the buzzing of flies and the huffing of his horse. When she didn't answer, he didn't press. My name's Nate, he said instead. Nate Tanner. Nate Tanner. The name was vaguely familiar, stirring a flicker of recognition. A lawman? A bounty hunter? No, something else. A name associated with skill, with being hard to find, with a certain quiet legend. She looked up at him again, really seeing him this time. The worn leather chaps, the gun belt slung low, the rifle in the saddle scabbard. He was armed, capable. A man who lived by his wits in dangerous country. Alara, she whispered, the name feeling foreign on her dry tongue. Alara, he repeated, a slight nod. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes held a sort of weary understanding. He gestured vaguely back towards the way he'd come. My camp's about an hour's ride back that way. Got some food. You need tending to. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. She looked at the empty horizon in the direction her brothers had ridden. There was nothing for her there but betrayal and death. She looked at Nate Tanner, a stranger who had pulled her from the earth. He was a risk, maybe, but not burying her alive was a good start. She nodded. Yes, sir. Please. He gave another quiet nod. All right then. Let's get you mounted up. Think you can manage? She was weak, trembling, but the thought of being alone again, of the open hole behind her, spurred a flicker of determination. I can try. He helped her awkwardly mount his bay, settling her in front of the saddle, her back against his chest. It felt strange, being so close to a stranger, feeling the solid warmth of another human after the cold isolation of the grave. His presence was a weight but not a heavy one. It was grounding. He swung up behind her, taking the reins. His arm settled loosely around her middle, steadying her. She stiffened initially, and used a touch that wasn't rough or angry, but his touch was impersonal, purely functional. She leaned back against him, exhausted and raw. Hold on, he said, and nudged the horse forward. The rhythm of the horse's gait was a lullaby. The sun was still high, but the immediate terror had receded, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. Alara closed her eyes, listening to the creak of the saddle leather, the soft thud of hooves, the steady beat of Nate Tanner's heart against her back. He hadn't asked about the gold, about her brothers, about anything that mattered in the world outside her own buried terror. He had just seen a living thing buried and dug it out. It was a simple act, profoundly life-altering. At his camp, a meager affair tucked into a rocky overhang, Nate helped her dismount. She was stiff and sore, every muscle protesting. He had a small fire going, nursed carefully with sparse kindling. A pot of beans simmered over the low flames. He got her settled by the fire on a thin blanket. She felt exposed, dirty, and fragile. He didn't fuss over her. He simply went about his business, checking on the horse, adding wood to the fire, stirring the beans. His movements were economical, efficient. He brought her a plate of beans and a piece of hardtack. Eat, he said. It wasn't an invitation, but a quiet command. She ate slowly, the food surprisingly good, warming her from the inside out. The simple act of eating felt like a rebellion against the earth that had tried to swallow her. He ate his own plate in silence across the fire from her, his gaze occasionally flicking to her face. He didn't seem to be judging her, just observing. After they finished, he brought over a tin cup of coffee, dark and strong. Drink this. Warm you up. She took it, the heat seeping into her cold hands. She looked at him over the rim of the cup. Thank you, she whispered, her voice still hoarse. He just nodded. He reached into a saddlebag and pulled out a roll of clean bandages and a small tin. Let's look at those scrapes. She hesitated, unused to anyone tending to her injuries. Her brothers usually ignored them or worse, caused them. It's all right, he said softly, seeing her apprehension. Just cleaning them up. He knelt beside her, his touch careful as he gently cleaned the dirt and scrapes from her hands and arms with a damp cloth. The sting was bearable, the unexpected gentleness of his touch almost more painful than the wounds themselves. He dabbed an antiseptic salve on them, then wrapped them loosely with the bandages. His brow was furrowed in concentration, his expression unreadable. They buried you, he said, finally addressing the unspoken horror. Alara swallowed, her throat tight. She looked away, staring into the fire. My brothers, she whispered. Jed and Silas. Nate's hands paused in wrapping a bandage. He looked at her face. Jed and Silas Lowry? Alara's head snapped up. He knew them? You heard of them? He finished the bandage, securing it neatly. Heard of him, he said, his voice low. Known for being rough around the edges. Rough around the edges didn't cover burying your own sister alive. But she understood his understatement. He wasn't prying, just acknowledging. He sat back on his heels, looking at her. Why? The single word hung in the air. Why? The simplest and hardest question. The gold, she said, the words tumbling out in a rush, quiet and raw. From the train, they said. They said I was slowing them down. Said I was a liability. That they couldn't split it 3 ways. It was easier, her voice broke. Easier to just make me disappear. Nate's jaw tightened. He looked away for a moment, out at the endless, empty landscape, then back at her. His eyes were hard, cold as ice. They left you for dead. Yes, she whispered. They left me for dead. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of her trauma and his unspoken thoughts. Nate Tanner. The name clicked fully into place. Not a lawman, not a bounty hunter. A man who often worked outside the law, but with his own code. A man who sometimes tangled with others of her brother's ilk. A gunslinger? Regulator. He stood up, walked a few steps away, hands on his hips, staring out at the horizon. He seemed to be weighing something. She watched him, a sense of dread creeping back. Had she told him too much? Would he ride away now, the problem too complicated? He turned back to her. His expression was unreadable. They heading towards the border? Alara nodded. That's what they said. He considered this for a long moment. Then he made his decision. She saw it in the subtle shift of his stance, the set of his shoulders. All right, Alara, he said, walking back towards the fire. You can stay here tonight. Get some rest. Rest. The word felt foreign. How could she rest, knowing Jed and Silas were out there? Knowing they had done this? As darkness fell, the desert became a different world, silent and vast under a sky thick with stars. The fire cast flickering shadows on the rock face behind them, creating shifting, deceptive shapes. Alara huddled close to the fire, still wrapped in the blanket Nate had given her from his gear, cleaner than the one she'd been buried in. Nate sat opposite her, cleaning his rifle with slow, deliberate movements. The metallic click and slide of the action was the only sound besides the crackling fire. She watched him, drawn by his quiet competence. He wasn't talkative, offered no easy reassurances, but his presence was a solid thing against the terrifying emptiness of the night. He was simply there. He didn't ask her any more questions about her brothers, about their past, about the gold. He didn't seem to care about any of it, only the immediate reality. A girl dug out of the ground, left for dead. She felt the shame of being abandoned, of being deemed worthless by her own blood. It was a cold ache that settled deep in her bones. She had always tried to be useful, to not be a burden. She cooked, she mended, she kept quiet, but it hadn't been enough. Why? She asked, the word barely a whisper in the vast silence. Nate paused his cleaning, looking up at her. Why what? Why did you dig me up? He considered the question for a moment, his blue eyes steady. Saw the disturbed earth, he said simply. Looked wrong, like a fresh grave, but too shallow. But you didn't know that I was alive. He shrugged, resuming his cleaning. Didn't know. Figured I'd check. Bad business, leaving folks in the ground out here without a proper burial, he paused. Worse business, leaving em alive. He said it with a quiet conviction that settled something in Alara's churning gut. It wasn't complicated for him. It was just bad business. A moral trespass in a land with few rules. He wasn't a saint. She knew that instinctively, but he had his line, and burying a child alive was apparently well past it. She watched him finish with the rifle, checking the action, running a cloth over the barrel. He did it with a kind of reverence, as if the weapon was an extension of himself. It was clear he was capable, dangerous if he needed to be. A protector in a harsh world where protectors were rare. Are you scared? She asked, the words escaping before she could stop them. Scared of her brothers? Scared of what might happen? He looked up again, his gaze sharp in the firelight. He didn't immediately answer. The wind sighed through the rocks. Being scared is useful, he said finally, his voice quiet. Keeps you alive. It's letting the fear rule you that's dangerous. He didn't say if he was scared, just spoke of fear itself. It was a practical view, devoid of sentimentality. It struck a chord in Alara. She had been ruled by fear for so long, fear of her brother's tempers, fear of being abandoned, fear of starving. But lying in that hole, the fear had been different, absolute, and she had still wanted to live. They might come back, she said, stating the possibility that clawed at her mind. Nate was silent for a moment. Then we'll deal with it, he said, his tone flat, leaving no room for argument. Get some sleep, Alara. You need it. He rolled out his own bedroll a short distance away, his rifle close at hand. He didn't offer more words, just settled down, his form a dark silhouette against the firelight. Alara watched him, feeling a strange mixture of fear and nascent safety. She was a burden, she knew, a complication in his life. But he hadn't left her. Not yet. And for the first time in a long time, surrounded by the vast, indifferent desert night, Alara felt the fragile possibility of not being utterly alone. The next morning, they broke camp early, the sun barely clearing the horizon. Alara was still stiff and sore, the events of yesterday feeling both like a nightmare and a sharp, painful reality. Nate had coffee brewing before she even fully woke. He didn't rush her, just let her move at her own pace, which was slow and unsteady. He handed her a piece of hardtack. We'll ride east, he said, as if they had been traveling together for weeks. Nearest town is Redemption. Couple of days' ride. Got a sheriff there. Redemption. The name felt both hopeful and ironic. Could she ever feel redeemed after being cast out like trash? As they rode, Alara sat behind Nate again, the rhythmic sway of the horse less jarring than the day before. She looked back once, at the spot where she had been buried, a small, insignificant scar on the vast landscape. It was hard to believe she had been there, suffocating in the dark earth. Felt like another life. Nate didn't talk much as they rode. He pointed out landmarks occasionally, a distinctive rock formation, a dry creek bed, the distant shape of mountains on the horizon. He seemed to know this country intimately. She felt him watching the trail ahead, his eyes scanning the landscape, always alert. His vigilance was a quiet comfort. As the hours passed, Alara found herself observing him. The way he handled the reins, the subtle communication with the horse. The lines around his eyes, deeper in the harsh sunlight. He seemed carved from the same tough material as the land itself. He wasn't soft, not by any means, but there was no cruelty in him. They stopped by a small, murky pool of water mid-morning. Nate dismounted, letting the horse drink. Wash your face, he suggested, gesturing to the pool. Alara knelt by the water's edge, looking at her reflection. A dirt-streaked, bruised face stared back, eyes wide and haunted. She cupped her hands, scooping up the cool, brackish water, and splashed it on her face. The dirt ran in muddy rivulets. She scrubbed gently, the sting of the scrapes a reminder of her ordeal. The water helped, washing away some of the grime, revealing the paleness beneath. When she finished, she looked at Nate. He was watching her, his expression unreadable. She felt a blush creep up her neck. I'm sorry, she mumbled. I'm a mess. You're alive, he said simply. It wasn't a platitude. It was a statement of worth, of significance. You're alive. It resonated deep within her. Being alive was the victory. He didn't offer to help her further with cleaning up, leaving her that small dignity. As they remounted, she felt a subtle shift in her own posture. Less slumped, a little straighter. The miles wore on, the sun climbed high, then began its slow descent. The heat was oppressive. Alara felt her strength draining away, the exhaustion from her ordeal catching up with her. She leaned back against Nate, her eyes closing occasionally. He seemed to sense it. He didn't comment, but his arm around her waist felt a little more supportive. He kept their pace steady, unrushed. Late in the afternoon, as the shadows lengthened, Nate stopped the horse. Alara opened her eyes. He was staring intently at something in the distance, back the way they had come. Alara's heart leaped into her throat. "What is it?" "Dust," he said, his voice low. "Two riders. Moving fast. Jed and Silas." The thought sent a cold wave of terror through her. They had come back. "They're coming this way?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Looks like it," Nate said, his hand going instinctively to his rifle in the scabbard. His body tensed behind her. Alara's breath hitched. They had found them, or they were just backtracking, covering their tracks, and stumbled onto Nate's trail. Either way, it meant danger. They wouldn't want any witnesses, especially not Nate Tanner if they knew who he was. They won't stop," she stammered, fear making her breathless. "Not if they see you with me. They'll know you dug me up." Nate didn't reply immediately. He scanned the surrounding landscape. Sparse cover. No easy places to hide. "Hold on tight, Alara," he said finally, his voice hard now. He spurred the horse into a faster trot, heading not directly away, but angling towards a jumble of rocks she hadn't noticed before, slightly off their course. The change in gait was jarring. Alara clung to Nate's waist, her face pressed against his back. She could feel the tension radiating from him. The dust plume behind them was growing larger, closer. They reached the rocks. It wasn't much, just a small rise with some scattered boulders, but it offered a little concealment. Nate dismounted quickly, pulling Alara down with him. He tethered the horse behind the largest rock. "Stay low," he ordered, his voice urgent but calm. He drew his rifle, checking the action with a quiet click. He moved to the edge of the rocks, peering back the way they had come. Alara crouched behind a boulder, her heart hammering against her ribs. She could hear the thundering of hooves now, closer, closer. Jed and Silas. They were here. They had come to finish the job, or maybe they saw the horse and rider and saw an easy target. She risked a peek around the rock. Two riders, clear against the afternoon sun, bore down on their position. She recognized the way they sat their horses, the set of their hats. Jed and Silas undeniably, and they were heading right for the rocks. Nate was still as stone, his rifle raised slightly, resting on a rock edge. He wasn't going to run. He was going to face them. For her, the realization hit Alara with the force of a blow. He was putting himself in danger because he hadn't left her in that grave. The riders closed the distance. They were maybe 50 yards away, slowing slightly as they approached the rocks. Wary. Jed was in the lead, Silas close behind. They saw the tethered horse, the disturbed earth where Nate had dismounted. They knew someone was here. Jed raised a hand, signaling Silas. They spread out slightly, approaching cautiously. Alara squeezed her eyes shut, wishing herself invisible. This was her fault. She had brought this on Nate. Then, Jed's voice, rough and carrying on the wind. "Tanner, we know you're in there." Nate Tanner. They knew his name, knew who he was. The famous cowboy, the quiet legend. Her brothers were reckless, but they weren't stupid enough to not recognize a known quantity. They were probably hoping he was just passing through, maybe had some valuables. But seeing the tethered horse, the dismounted rider, they knew it was a potential confrontation. And now they knew who they were up against. Nate didn't reply. He remained still, a silent threat. Silas yelled next. "Send out the girl, Tanner. She ain't no concern of yours." The girl. They knew she was with him. Maybe they had seen the two sets of tracks from the burial site, or maybe they'd followed his trail from further back and put two and two together. Either way, the truth was out. They knew he had found her. Alara flinched, shrinking back further behind the rock. They were calling for her, as if she were property to be handed over. The shame burned hotter than the desert sun. Nate's voice finally broke the silence, calm and clear, carrying across the short distance. "She's with me now." His tone was quiet, final, a statement of fact. It held no threat, no challenge, yet it was more powerful than any shout. It was a declaration. She was with him, not theirs to take. A moment of tense silence hung in the air. Then, Jed laughed, a short, sharp, unpleasant sound. With you? She's a Lowry. You don't know what you're mixed up in, Tanner. She's trouble. I know what I found, Nate replied, his voice steady. And I know you left her to die. The quiet accusation seemed to hit a nerve. Jed's face, even from this distance, twisted with anger. That was family business. Stay out of it. It stopped being family business when you buried her alive, Nate said. There was no more talk after that. Jed and Silas exchanged glances. They were killers, brutal men, but Nate Tanner was known. Known for being fast, for being dangerous. They had the element of surprise, maybe, but he had position and the moral high ground, thin as it might be out here. They had underestimated him, thinking he'd just ride on by a disturbed patch of ground. Jed cursed, loud and rough. He looked like he wanted to charge, but Silas put a hand on his arm, shaking his head. They were caught. They couldn't just ride up on Nate Tanner. A standoff. Alara held her breath, listening to the wind, the distant thud of the horses' hooves as Jed and Silas shifted their weight. The sun was starting to dip lower, casting long shadows. Jed spat on the ground. "This ain't over, Tanner," he yelled. "You show your face around redemption. You'll regret it." Nate didn't answer. He just held his position, rifle steady. After another moment of tension, Jed and Silas slowly, reluctantly, turned their horses. They didn't ride away fast this time, but kept a watchful eye on the rocks as they retreated the way they had come. The dust plume they kicked up grew smaller, less distinct, until finally they were just two distant shapes on the horizon, then gone. The silence returned, heavy with the aftermath of the confrontation. Alara slowly unclenched her fists, realizing her nails had dug crescents into her palms. Her heart was still pounding, but the immediate danger had passed. Nate remained in position for a long moment, watching the empty horizon. Only when he was sure they were gone did he lower his rifle, his shoulders slumping slightly with a release of tension. He turned back to Alara, his blue eyes meeting hers. The guardedness was still there, but the intensity had lessened. "They're gone," he said, stating the obvious. Alara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Tears welled in her eyes, not of fear this time, but of overwhelming relief and a deep, profound gratitude. He had stood his ground. He had faced down her brothers, not for gold, not for a bounty, but for her. He walked over to her, kneeling down. He looked at her face, seeing the tears, the lingering fear, but also something new, a flicker of strength, a dawning understanding of what had just happened. "You all right?" he asked again, the simple question carrying a weight of shared experience now. Alara wiped the tears away with a dirt-streaked hand. She looked at him, truly seeing him, and not just the capable stranger who had rescued her, but the man who had risked his life for her. "Yes," she whispered, her voice stronger than before. "Yes, I'm all right. Thank you, Nate." He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He didn't say "you're welcome." It wasn't necessary. He stood up. "We need to get moving, before they decide to circle back." They rode the rest of the day in silence, the encounter with her brothers hanging between them, a tangible thing. But it had changed something. Alara felt a shift in their dynamic. She wasn't just a burden anymore, a rescued waif. She was someone he had defended, someone whose safety he had prioritized over his own ease. As they made camp that night, the routine was familiar but different. Nate built the fire, prepared the food. But the silence between them was less empty. It was filled with unspoken understanding. He didn't treat her with pity, but with a quiet respect. He offered her a piece of jerky. She took it, meeting his gaze. There was no fear in her eyes now, only a burgeoning resilience. "Redemption, you said?" she asked, her voice steady. "That's the place," Nate confirmed. "Will they try to find me there?" "Maybe," he allowed. "But Redemption's a town. Harder for them to cause trouble in the open. And the sheriff there, he's got his moments." He didn't make any promises of absolute safety, just stated the facts. It was grounding. Alara understood. The danger wasn't magically gone, but she wasn't facing it alone anymore. She looked at the fire, the flames licking upwards, warm and bright against the darkening sky. She thought of the cold, dark earth, the suffocating blanket. She had been buried, discarded, erased. But Nate Tanner had dug her up. He had pulled her back into the light. She didn't know what the future held. Redemption might be just another place of hardship. Her brothers might come looking, but she was alive, and she was no longer the same terrified girl who had been buried in the desert. The earth had tried to claim her, and her own family had helped, but she had been given back by a quiet, weathered man with blue eyes and a strong hand. "I'm not a liability," she said suddenly, clearly, stating it aloud for the first time. It wasn't a question, but a declaration to herself, to the silent desert, to the stars above, and to the man sitting across the fire. Nate looked up, his gaze steady. He didn't argue, didn't offer platitudes. He simply nodded, a small, acknowledging gesture. He had seen her vulnerability, her fear, and now her defiance. He had seen the transformation begin. She was Alara, not Jed and Silas's sister, not a burden, not someone to be buried and forgotten. She was Alara, who had been to the edge of death and pulled back. And in the quiet presence of Nate Tanner, under the vast, indifferent sky, she began to understand what it meant to be truly, stubbornly, resiliently alive. The journey wasn't over, the scars would remain, but she was standing, breathing, ready to face whatever came next. The desert had nearly broken her, but it had also, unexpectedly, led her to a chance for redemption not just in a town, but within herself.